Welcome, Stephen.
Hello, Bruce. It's lovely to have you here. It's a nice sunny afternoon, late afternoon. It's exciting to have you in the hood. And we have a guest.
We do have a guest. We have a very special guest, and Jeff Van Groningen. Before we get into JVG's story, which is in basketball, it's extensive. And we want to find out what you're up to of late. But first, a shout out to our sponsors, to Brian Curl Basketball. Great program, academy up and running. 20 kids now in his academy.
It's unreal.
Throbbing, along with the other programs he does. They're great programs, and I'm very appreciative. And Chris Weir from FIT Education, who look after the all the diploma that those academy kids do. Great RTO, Registered Training Organization.
And Bruce, news. Have we got a new sponsor?
I was about to break it out, Jeff. Are you stable? Yes, we got Big Dog Sports has jumped on. Our good friend Ryan Stolberg, ex-Bullet, ex-Capital. They make outdoor basketball courts for the home.
He's got a company, he's a builder, like they build decks and
Yes.
and extensions to houses and stuff, and they've extended into this, in my understanding from Stolly. I think the great Ben Thompson's got something involved with it.
He's all in.
Benny T's in everything.
And I think, particularly in Brisbane, where we have such a dire shortage of venues,
Yeah.
what a great way to roll.
Yep.
So welcome, Stolly. Welcome and thank you. And now we want to dump in head first.
And let me tell you, I did my research as always on our guests, and this is one hell of a story. There's things here I just hadn't recalled what Jeff's done, and I want to start with, tell us your story. Country Victoria, is that your stomping grounds?
Yeah, thank you guys. Great to be here. So we moved out as a family from the US when I was a kid.
Okay.
Because of my dad's job, nothing to do with sport. Dad was a criminologist.
So where were you born in the US?
California.
Okay.
But we moved out when I was young, and
I can see that Californian tan.
Adopted Brisbane tan. But he was moved out to Victoria to run the prison system. So
Holy moly.
a growth industry, crime, and he came out, and that's how I ended up in Victoria. I ended up an hour from Melbourne, in actually a pretty strong basketball area. It wasn't too far from Sunbury, between kind of Sunbury and Bendigo, right in that sweet spot. There was a lot of good players coming out of that area.
So, what grades were you in
primary school initially, but I went back and finished my schooling in the States, so it was a bit of a hybrid.
Where in California, Jeff?
So the family was from Central California. Draw a line between LA and San Francisco, and that Fresno.
Because I went to school in Stockton.
Yep. San Joaquin Valley.
Yeah.
That's where the family was.
And so you were playing high school basketball?
Yep.
Okay.
So I went back to the States after I had been in Victoria so that I could pursue basketball.
Okay.
And did that. But in a strange twist, didn't go back to California because the close friends of ours who were neighbors in California had moved to Texas, and he was a basketball coach.
Yeah.
And so that was my connection. So I went back there. So I was an hour from San Antonio. So I used to get down, watch the Spurs games, watch whatever college games I could. Was at a school called Tybee High School, which later became famous because of Johnny Manziel. Johnny Football went there a long time later. And, as with most schools in Texas, it was predominantly football. Football's a religion down there.
Yeah.
But basketball was still big there.
Can you explain for our listeners? I mean, I was very fortunate. I went to high school for just 9 months from sort of.
He got kicked out.
Yeah.
No, he didn't.
But the amount of training and that high schools do in the US, you understand Australian schools. The GPS probably the only thing close to it.
Yeah, it's a totally different system.
Correct.
Yeah.
You want to explain a little bit?
Well, because the Australian system is predominantly club-based, of course, and club and then rep and then state.
Yep.
But you're ascending through those ranks in the States by playing for your school and then trying to make the college ranks, like Bruce did. And so it's a totally different setup. So the pinnacle of junior basketball, especially back then, is high school basketball, but nowadays.
But massive as well.
Huge.
Like the separation of American football to baseball to basketball. Whilst we have seasons, most of our kids here in Australia can play any sport they want at any time of the year.
Yep.
But that's not the same in the States.
No, and so the separation of the sports is that, you know, there's very definitive times of year that you can play football, baseball, basketball. They're the predominant, you know, ones that are regulated that heavily in terms of dates. And so you can't get on a basketball floor until a certain date, and you must be off a basketball floor on a certain
it's regulated,
date. Correct.
right? But what about these things like the AAU and all that sort of shit?
That's what caused the evolution of the AAU, is that they said, well, we don't have those rules. We will play all summer, and we will become an alternative to just playing high school basketball. And they initially were high school basketballers playing AAU as the second line thing.
I've been somewhat critical of that formula because I think I have no problem with kids playing. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's a money grab.
They're two very different systems, because the high school system, as you know, is extremely structured. It's a coach's game.
Yep.
You're practicing all week to play a game, or possibly two games.
Yep.
But AAU is the opposite. You're playing game after game after game with hardly any practice, which is very player friendly, but not necessarily all that structured in terms of coaching.
So fundamentals sort of go out the door, right?
Yeah, and it's become huge because it's also unregulated in the sense that you can actually give the kids something. You can give them clothing, give them shoes, you can give them money, you can fly them in a plane. So you have the advent over time of NBA player-backed AAU teams. So Russell Westbrook's team is called Why Not Basketball. The EBYL is a Nike-funded league.
Would he be doing that just because he's got an ego and I can pay for a team? It's not truly helping a kid become.
It can. I mean, I don't think you can throw a blanket over the entire AAU and shoe circuit system, because that's what it is now. Yeah. It's backed by predominantly athletic.
It's here in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. But there are players that have honed their skills there and come out of that pretty well. But then there's a bunch of kids that have just learned to run and gun and not much else that have also come out of that.
And their parents have spent a lot of money when they're young to get the Energizer Bunny team jersey singlet and all that sort of stuff.
But the elite level of those kids at that system are not paying any money.
Right.
Yeah, they're actually being invited to play. So if you look at a kid like Jaden Cecil out of Queensland, who's easily the best 15-year-old right now, who's at Utah Prep right now. He's left the Queensland system.
Right.
And he's being heavily pursued this coming US summer, as in 3 months from now, to play for a myriad of different teams. He won't spend a dollar. His parents won't. In fact, they'll probably be funded to have him.
But that's an elite kid.
It's an elite kid.
And most sports, elite kids, once they get a certain level, they pay for nothing.
Yep.
Right.
All right, I'm gonna pivot.
Okay, sorry.
You came into the NBL. This is your first stint as an assistant coach with the Geelong Supercats under Jimmy Calvin.
Correct.
So my good friend and good coach, Glenn Bynes.
Yes.
I came up in '93. Glenn was told he was going to be the head coach of Geelong.
Yes.
Who was the owner of Geelong then?
Richard Austin from Cotton On Clothing.
There you go. That didn't work out. So he was 1 year as Jimmy's assistant. 23. You had to have been the youngest assistant ever. Yep.
That's what I understand. They did some media on that, and certainly as a full-time role. It wasn't an intern role. It wasn't a...
So how did he get it? How did this work?
So how it all came about was that the previous three years, almost 4 years, since I was about 18 or 19, I had been running basketball camps across Victoria and New South Wales.
Yeah.
I had a very close connection with the Gaze family. Andrew had always been tremendous to me.
Yeah.
He is about 5 years older than me, but had always been very generous with his time. So I came up with a formula of running basketball camps in places that knew what the NBL was. In fact, were very fluent in NBL basketball, because back then, you'll remember it, Channel 10 had it.
Oh,
They had NBL and they had NBA.
Yeah.
And on their weekend shows, they showed both. Mm-hmm. And they covered NBL games live. A lot of people talk about right now being the golden era. That was the first one.
Well, yes. Jeff, if correct me if I'm wrong, rugby amateur, so not professional.
Yeah.
rugby league was just in Sydney only.
First national sport.
Yeah.
It was the first national sport.
And AFL didn't have a Brisbane team.
That's right. So it was the truly national sport at the time. So getting back to these camps, what I'd worked out, Bruce, was that kids in Mildura and Kerrang and Hamilton and Horsham and places that were 2 to 3 to 4 hours out of out of Melbourne saw the games and had no prospect of getting to the games, saw the players' names and had no prospect of meeting the players, understood all of them, who Andrew Gaze was, who Carfino was, who DMAC was, who Leonard was, who the coaches were, who Ray Borner was. They knew these players, but they had no viable chance of seeing an NBL player. I brought the players to them. And so I brought a company together that would tour Victoria and New South Wales with these players, do clinics which were not so much about just fundamental basketball. It was also about meeting the player.
Yeah.
So they were sort of a hybrid between a meet and greet and a clinic. We did do basketball work there, but you weren't going to become a fundamentally better player in a day or two of our clinics.
They're having fun, but
we were trying to enthuse the players.
Yeah.
We were trying to do, and we were backed by companies. So I had Nike. Now, what else I did, Bruce, is I went into all the clubs from the players that I would utilize. So if I would grab DMAC, I would go to the Giants. I'd get to know them. I'd grab all their gear, all their posters, all their giveaways. I'd take them. So the clubs loved it because they were getting free promotion of their club out there. But I was not paying anything for anything. Except
that's always a winner.
Always a winner. And so, except for the player, I could tell you a quick story. Leonard was the first guy that I really did a lot of work with clinics. Mm-hmm. And so I said to Leonard on one occasion, I'm going to go to this place called Horsham. It's a few hours out of Melbourne. I can give you some cash to do it. And his eyes are already up. All right, I'm listening.
Yep.
And it's going to take us some time, but I've got a good car that I was borrowing a good car. I was just, everything was on the smell of an oily rag in the early stages. And he said, what time do we need to go? I said, 6. We probably need to push off around 6. He said, oh, it's an evening clinic. I said, no, 6 a.m. He said, you're crazy. I'll just be getting back in from the club. I said, that's okay. I'm driving. I'll stop and do you a breakfast and you can sleep. So I convinced him to go. Now, this is back then, of course, this was off season, so it's scorching summer heat. This is summer off season. Yeah. Horsham is hot.
Yeah, it
so
gets hot.
So I'm on the way out there, and such was my naivety about how big these were going to be, because this was my first big foray into it. I had gone out and pre-promoted at Horsham by sticking posters of Leonard Copeland up on the tin shed of their stadium 3 weeks before, with my own insert down the bottom that says the Jump Shot Basketball Clinic featuring Leonard Copeland is coming. Show up on the day with your cash. First in, best dressed. I had no idea. This is pre-internet. We didn't.
So this is Owen Hewen country.
Yes, it's Owen Hewen country.
And the Bruce boys.
And Owen knew I was coming.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't ever doing them at the exclusion of the associations. I always let them know. I said, hey, I'd love to involve your coaches, whatever, great benefit. Let's enthuse your kids. So we're cruising out. Leonard's asleep. He wakes up. We're an hour from Horsham. He goes, have you even thought about how many kids would be out here? I said, look, if we get 50 kids, like this is a great success. Don't worry about, like, I'm seeing his eyes thinking, am I going to get paid? You'll get paid, like you'll get your money, no problem. I might not make any money, but you'll get paid. So we get closer. We roll into Horsham. It's 40 degrees.
Yeah.
The pool, as always, is next to the stadium. That's the old Victorian model. The pool, the stadium, the lawn bowls, it's all together.
Yeah.
And there's this line of kids with Michael Jordan jerseys and things coming out, but it's 40 degrees. And Leonard goes, this is going to be huge. I said, they're lining up for the pool. It's 40. It's a weekend. They're not for us. I get in, there's 330 kids lined up outside. We're charging $80 cash.
Wow.
And I've committed Leonard $350. So I'm just thinking, now I gave Leonard more than $350. So I ran 50 of these over the 2 years when I was running jump shot promotions. Now what happened?
Because no one had done it.
Nobody had done it. And nobody had thought to bring the players out. And it gets better. I was hitting Carfino and Billy Woods up and saying, on your Sunday basketball show, you know that thing called the community notice board?
Yeah.
Can I put we don't care. So I'm getting free advertising on the Sunday afternoon thing with an ad. And I'm advertising the jump shot clinics.
Bruce, I'm already
Gone.
thinking that the jump shop clinics would still have
Gorgon
cash.
and I had
I mean, can they sponsor us? Yeah.
But it's a bit different. Nobody really wants to see,
No.
Gorgon and Palmer. They want to see Leonard. They want to see players.
So,
We would get guest players.
And I remember one time we played a pre-season game in somewhere country Victoria, Ballarat or something,
huge.
and I don't know, and we were just coming out of our team bus, and Leroy steps out of the bus, and I swear to God, it was like Michael Jordan had stepped into town. It was, and you realise that, as you said, it was the only national game. Leroy's profile nationally at that time was phenomenal.
So it's safe to say, and I'm going to, I want to shower you with some praise. You're one of the best marketing in our sport.
Well, it worked at the time. And so getting back to your question about how the Geelong thing came about, is that the clubs really liked this when they weren't doing it and they didn't realize what it was really going to be.
Right.
And then it blew up. We were getting, I had 760 kids showed up to a place called Kerrang when I was told there wasn't 760 kids in the town. And so it started to get big. So I had
And 2 hoops and 1 ball.
Yeah, we sometimes had very limited resources to work with. So anyway, I had some coaches reach out. Jim Calvin was one of them because he was a guy that loved that stuff.
Right.
And he reached out as well as a couple other guys and said, would you be a development officer for us? Because you're running these jump shot basketball camps. And I'll tell you this funniest story. This is where I'm eternally grateful to my dad. So I came home one day, Jim Calvin had called me, and I was an NBL fan, so I was rapt. Got this call from he was a very sweet talking guy, right? There's a lot of stories about Jimmy Calvin and his ability to...
He could spin a yard.
He could spin many yards.
Yeah.
He was the last guy out of Kuwait. He was best friends with Bobby Knight. He had all the stories. So I get this, and I'm young. Like I'm green young.
Jeez, 23 years old.
And this was a year before that. And he calls me and he says, if you come with me over to my Cats in the Prow basketball program, that's what he called his camps, you can run that. And I'll let you sort of be around the practices and all that sort of stuff. And I was just blown away. And so I said to my dad, I've had this offer to go and work for the Geelong Supercats. And he said, being a smart guy, well, what's the offer? What does it involve? I said, it's $15,000, but I'm with the Supercats. And he said, what did your last basketball camp make? And I said, $15,000. And he said, it doesn't sound like the greatest deal to me. And I was ready because I just wanted to get in there.
Yeah.
And but he said, but that's okay. I'm not quashing the dream. What do you want to do? And I said, I want to go into coaching or front office. And he said, why don't you go back and say that to him? So I showed up back to Jim, and Jim thought he had it all worked out. He had told the CEO everything. They're going to get this guy. It's going to be great. I said, Jim, I can't. I'm declining it. And he said, well, why? I said, I've got greater ambitions than being a development officer. I actually want to go into coaching and ultimately become a GM. That's what I want to do. And so he called me back a couple of days later. He said, I'm shaking up the staff. You can have the number 1 assistant job. And then I went back to Dad and said, they're still not paying me a lot. And Dad said, yeah, but now it's different because now that's a title you actually want to do, and you wanted to get into that path. And at that stage, I really wanted to coach. But I always had in my mind that ultimately I wanted to run the club.
Right. So how many years were you with Jimmy?
Well, only a couple of years because Jimmy did himself out of a job there. Yeah, for a whole lot of reasons.
Did you go straight to Melbourne?
No, I went back to running my own camps for a few years and worked for Peter Fittis for a year.
Right.
To gap fill. And then I went into Melbourne when Grant Cadee took the job, which was controversial because he was an agent and the CEO of Melbourne at the same time. And Grant asked me to come in. And that was great for me because I knew Grant and Brett Brown and Bruce Bolden and others through their Dr. Pepper challenge that they had run.
But you came into the Tigers as a marketing manager.
I did, but as an assistant GM to Grant was the path that
Then Grant takes off.
And then Grant took off because at the time he was very close with Brett and Shane Heel, and they went on took the new challenge on at Sydney the first time when Brett took the job the first time at Sydney, and Hammer went in there and all of that. And so Grant vacated, and Lindsay and Andrew being Lindsay and Andrew, they don't like a lot of, there's no need to just
people
change.
outside of their circle.
So, and I'm in there, and I was close with that family. Very humbled to be always in the circle of being able to listen to Lindsay. That's all I wanted to do was listen to Lindsay, and Lindsay then reached out and said, look, why don't you just come in and do that? And it was a different GM job because Lindsay effectively, Lindsay had the club under control, and it did have a board, but really Lindsay made all the decisions, and rightly so. But what it allowed me to do is get in there and be the GM of a club, and a very good club, and a very stable club.
So how old were you now?
28.
28 years and years.
How many
28,
years were you with Melbourne Tigers?
A couple of years, and then that's when Eddie Groves came knocking.
Okay.
So what happened is that when I was at Melbourne, at that time there was 4 meetings a year between GMs and owners all together.
Right.
Just the GMs and the owners would meet. And I would often get sent to that because Lindsay had no interest in going to those type of talk fests. And I would go on behalf of Melbourne, and Eddie would go on behalf of Brisbane. He didn't even have a GM at the time. He had Sibs as Rob Sibley was basically like a manager, office manager sort of role, and had come out of playing and was. But Eddie would go to those meetings.
So Eddie was 1 year in?
Yeah, Eddie was a few years in. And so Eddie and I, so in a strange twist, what would happen is that all the clubs, I think there was 13 or so at the time, it was more than now.
Yeah.
They would come together and they would have these get-togethers and set rules and set, agenda items and things like that about the direction of the league. And Eddie and I would catch up, and then afterwards, we were the only 2 non-drinkers in the crew. So we would sit around and teetotal and chat.
Right.
And that's how I got to know Eddie Groves.
So Eddie's first year was David Weir, the acting general manager.
And when I came later, David had gone.
Yeah, I think that was...
But the Eddie evolution was really interesting because what Eddie was a very smart guy in a million ways, but one of the things that I think he was most smart about is he knew what he knew and he knew what he didn't know.
Yeah.
And in basketball, he had tried to be hands-on for a while, which a lot of owners do, even to this day. But he worked out that it didn't work. So he watched Kahari Jackson get off the plane and not be able to stand up. He watched some guys that he had been told were 6'8" Adonis has come out as 6'3", poor shooting guards. That whole thing.
You know what happens when you go from the North Hemisphere to the South.
There's a shrinkage.
Yeah. Bruce had 7 foot on his CV.
Lindsay and I crossed each other. We were the last 2 people in the international airport.
Right.
And he had that look. He's looking at me. You're not Bruce Palmer, are you? I go, are you Lindsay Gauze? Like a happy as Larry. I didn't have my bags. My bags were lost in traffic. Noticeably disappointed. How tall are you? I go, 6. What these shoes on? 6'4".
Well, Lindsay always likes tall players. I mean, that was always the case.
But he's like, oh, okay. But even your program says you're 6'5.5" at UOP. Yeah. Gorgon says you're 6'5". I go, I'm not 6'5", mate. You don't know that Gorgon's a liar by now. You've got a lot to learn. No, we all did that. But so, how many years were you at Melbourne then?
Well, I was there for about 3 years before
coming up here.
Eddie then approached me, and I actually initially said no. I was actually really happy in Melbourne.
Right.
And I was living there, enjoyed it, had no interest in coming to Brisbane. But Eddie asked me to come up for a day, and he wanted to show me the vision of what he wanted to do. He wanted to change out of the Auchenflower offices. He had another office in mind. He wanted to talk to Harvey with me about venues and all of those things. And this day was a whirlwind, and he sold me on the vision of what was ahead rather than what was now. Because if it was based on what was there at that point, it would have been a really bad job to take. The club was in was really in a flat spot.
Yeah. Well, they had Dick Orlick.
Correct.
Did you let him know?
Well, when he was 0-10, I did.
Yeah. Okay.
So at 0-10, I moved him and Paul Mellett out and Joey Wright in.
Right.
And that's the only time I've ever made a forced coaching change.
Good. Good change, though.
But that was a disastrous time. But that wasn't the only thing that occurred that year. We were running out of players that were motivated to play for the Bullets. We had Randy Rutherford, who had no interest in winning games. We had a bunch of other players, some of whom I won't name, but they had gone down the path of clocking in, clocking out, and not showing any interest.
Yeah.
And I let them go. And I remember very distinctly people coming up to me after my first and second game as GM saying, the club has never been worse than it is right now under you. And I said, well, I just got here.
Yeah.
But if that's what you want to do and say, that's fine. But let me tell you something. It's going to get worse. So by the time the midpoint of that season came, I asked Rob Sibley to come back. Do you remember when he came back and played? He came back and played on one leg. And I remember going into the team setting when Joey was coaching.
Yeah.
And said to Joey, I just want to address the group for 1 minute. I'm just letting everyone know I'm reactivating Rob Sibley. He hasn't played for a number of years and is on one leg and was actually smoking at halftime of those games. And I'm doing it because unlike what I'm seeing, he actually cares for the Bullets.
Yeah.
He actually loves the Bullets. And so I wasn't worried about winning. We were gone anyway that year. I was worried about resetting and getting people that wanted to be there. I had discussions with Leroy, who had a falling out with the club and didn't know where he sat. And so I said, I want you to come back. You've got a corporate box of your own each and every game. Don't care what you do with it. You can sell it to guests. You can use it. You can bring your family. But I need you here. Whatever happened before wasn't something that had happened with me. So I wanted that relationship back. I wanted the Brian Curls there. I wanted you there. I wanted everybody that had an impactful, contribution to the Bullets. Now, some say yes, some say no, but I enjoyed that aspect of it. And other than the first year, we then never missed the top four. Yeah. So I was there for 8 years. The first year was the burning embers year it was just a campfire that needed to burn down. And then for the next 7, we never missed the top 4. And the reset began with guys like Stephen Black, and later, and Benny Castle, and later bringing guys in that really were elite players. CJ was first it was Sammy. Derek, Sammy, Hoagie. That whole crew. Dylan Boucher was a big one. Dylan Boucher was a
great import.
Yeah, Dylan Boucher was an important one.
Yeah, he was a bit of a glue guy.
Did Damian Ryan play for us?
So Damian Ryan was only there the first year.
Not with you?
Yeah, but Dale Ryan stayed on as an assistant.
Right, yeah.
Rest in peace. And he was there for most of my 8 years, assisting Joey in one way or the other.
And Ronnie Rat was on there.
And Ronnie Ratliff we had as a full-time assistant from about the second year in.
One of the toughest teams all time. I look at
we should have won a couple. We won one in 07, and then the next year we got beaten in the semis by Melbourne. But they were really good. But we probably should have won that one. But the year before, and we didn't lose on our home floor for 2 years. Didn't lose on there at all.
That was a great squad.
It was a very, very good team.
I have to be honest with you. I'm thinking about the 8 years, and I know that I was disillusioned as a basketball fan with the Bullets. I hardly went to a game.
Yeah.
I mean, I own season tickets now, and I could get free tickets up in the rafters if I want to, but I like to sit where we sit. But we didn't even, like my circle of mates, we didn't even try to go to those games.
Yeah, there'd been a lot of people had.
They've done a good job, and I got to give you credit for that, Jeff, and that they do kind of they make an effort to look after past Bullets.
Yeah. And Steve Catlin has continued that, trying hard, and he wants feedback. I mean, I'm sure you're in contact with Steve, and he's very
I haven't gotten to know the guys that are currently there. I've gone out to a few games with Harvey at the venue. He's invited me out because he's back at his venue. But I do look forward to going out there a bit,
Yeah, well, there's a chat. And
do we know, are they going to play out there again next year? Is that the plan?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I would assume so.
I bet you they are, because Malcolm just won the...
he won the Executive of the Year.
Yeah, so that's because of the move and because of what they've got in South Bank.
You're guessing?
Yes.
Okay, I believe you.
Yeah.
Mate, I want to stay.
But what I'm saying is like a coach, the executive of the year award. Like, what do they look at the bank balance, or it's like
How do you pick the referee of the year, or do
it's
you?
called you put everyone's name in a hat and someone pulls it out, and that's how you win those awards.
All right.
It's
So
a big rule. I mean, as you know, Queensland basketball, like, hey, the Wizards are the
Club of the Year.
club of the year. How the hell do you decide on that?
yeah. So were you here when the league almost didn't
Yes.
exist?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were still with Brisbane at that
Yeah, well,
time?
I was with Brisbane when it went down.
Right.
Yeah, so Eddie packed it up, and then he fully believed that there'd be
Eddie
buyers.
really propped up the league.
Yeah, well, Eddie and Rafi Jaminder at the South Dragons at the same time were two of the best owners. You wanted to keep them involved, but the NBL administration at the time, which was co-merged with BA
Yes.
under Larry Sengstock, not the Larry we have
Yeah.
now, they were not in a position, nor did they have an interest in really fostering the private owners. I think they had a foot in both camps about what they really wanted. And they wanted to not lose, I think, a lot of association-connected ideas around clubs. And in my opinion, they ran out owners that they need not run out. They should have done everything possible to keep Rafi Jaminder in the league.
Right.
He's in the Pratt family. That you don't run those guys out
really?
of the league.
Where's
He's
Eddie
married
these
to a
days?
Pratt. Eddie splits time between here and the States, is what I understand. I haven't seen him for a long time, but he's
I've
still
got an interesting interrupting story. I was in the hospital with Anthony Pratt, and they wheeled him in. He had back surgery. I was in for traction. Handsome man. When he woke up, I thought, mate, he was in pain, and he had to move his bowels. So his doctor came.
Thanks
and
for sharing that.
Gave him a. No wonder we're banned
Yeah.
from YouTube. Gave him a suppository. My weight belt. You could hear that flew off. Like when, and when we woke up in the morning and we finally had a chance to talk because my back was bad. I had sciatica. I had a thing sitting on my sciatic nerve. This is 1981. I go, how did you feel? He goes, I could barely touch my toes. Got a little stiff. And he wasn't cut and buffed. So I'm thinking, man, your surgeon is out for you, pal. And they go, oh, God, I just can't pee. He couldn't move and everything. And then they came and gave me, pulled the curtain. A curtain doesn't do much for smell. And, but we got to be pretty, Gorgon later became good friends with Anthony. That's huge. Now, do I want to stay on the Van Groningen story, if you don't mind, Stephen? After Brisbane, did you go directly to Sydney?
No. So there was a gap in there, and I remained here in Brisbane. And about a year and a half after the Bullets, David White, who was the head of the network at Channel 10, Network 10, who was the guru of all sports. He'd made supercars happen, and he'd made basketball happen the first time on 10. He'd been there back then in those halcyon days. I went and met with him. It would have been somewhere around the end of 2009. I met with him with a proposal for a made-for-television basketball event called High Stakes Hoops.
We spoke
about
we did. Having a team and what have you. Yeah.
We did. And so
that was a really good tournament.
So it was a basketball version of IPL cricket.
Right.
Where you could buy a franchise each, and I sold eight franchises.
Eight teams.
And I sold them, and I also strategically gave a couple away, one to Lance Franklin, the footy player, one to D-Mac, and the others were
How long did the tournament go for?
6 days.
Yeah, right.
And Basketball Australia blackbanned it, so they didn't want anything to do with it.
It was something
Because
good.
it was something
They were
unique and new.
nervous about Fox Sports because it was 10 that was covering the event. And so I could tell you a million stories about that, but the funniest one to think about, or the one with the greatest gravitas, I guess, was that I was sitting here in Brisbane about 2 weeks into organising the event, and I got a call from the ACCC at 9 o'clock at night. I'll never forget it. And the guy said, "Oh, my name is John Cream from the ACCC." And I said, "Have I gone? Yeah. Have I done anything wrong?" And he said, No. The others have done something wrong. We're investigating Basketball Australia to do with shutting you down, and it's a monopoly, maneuver that they're trying.
Stopping your trade of business.
And I said, I just want to make it clear. Did I complain? I didn't complain, did I? He goes, no, and in fact, we need you to say that you want us to investigate it in order to go any further. And I said, what do I have to do? And he said, you just need to say, could you investigate it? And I said, well, could you investigate it? And he goes, yeah, we're on it. And he clicked the phone. Now, why that was important to me was that because I had approached a number of players who had said they wanted to play.
But they were told
and
they
then
can't.
they were told by their clubs they couldn't play, and they were upset. It was actually for them that I was worried because they were upset about because we had prize money.
Yes.
Foot Locker had tipped in good prize
Matty
money.
Shanahan's team won.
Matty Shanahan's team won it.
Yeah.
Adam Gibson won a 3-point shooting contest for $10,000 back then.
Yeah.
We had all sorts of things. So we got banned, and I ended up having a player draft from overseas to bring guys in, and I paid for those guys to come in. We had imports coming in. We ran it. I had Carfino, myself, John Riley, Billy Woods, and some others commentate on that. I commentated it with them. We ran it. We used the Adelaide Dome, which was owned by Eddie Groves at the time. He actually had bought the Adelaide Dome, and we ran it. And coming out of that event, now I didn't know how smart David White. I knew David was smart, David White, but I didn't know how smart. What he had used that was a beachhead into discussions with the NBL about Channel 10 making a return, and he forced them to really look at them again at being 10 on their new network 1HD, which is what we had used to air that tournament. And he took the rights, and upon taking the rights, he employed me for a further 2 years to commentate and consult to the 10 network, and I helped put together the first 2 years back that 10 had in covering the sport.
We're working this out. I like working it out, how old you are, all these little highlights in your very interesting history. So how old are we now?
Well, it was 2010, so yeah, I was 30. 2010, I was 40.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're starting to get a little bit of life experience by this stage, and you've dealt with some big hitters. I see there that the very interesting ex-premier of Queensland, that would be Campbell Newman.
That was the same year, just after this event.
And he won the election. I mean, this guy threw away his opportunity to be a premier for a long time.
For a long time, yeah.
He won the election by a country mile.
Yep.
And he had power. We were all here. I was only, I was similar age.
Campbell.
Correct. Can do.
But anyway, he decided to make decisions that the public didn't like and so forth. But tell us about your time with Campbell.
When we won the championship here in Brisbane, he'd done the whole keys to the city thing, and he had been attending games, and I got to know him. I had no idea that he was going to be the future premier. I didn't know that.
Because he was the mayor.
He's the mayor.
Yeah.
He's the mayor.
He was the Lord Mayor.
Yeah, Lord Mayor of Brisbane. So I got to know him. Now, when he took power, Ben Myers, his chief of staff, and Campbell had this policy, which I think is a very good one. I wish more governments would do it. And the policy was that in each ministerial area, so if you were the Minister for Health, if you're the Minister for Education, if you're the Minister for Sport, if you're the Minister for whatever, National Parks, you would have somebody in your office in an advisory role that was a subject matter expert in the area, so that they didn't just have...
So someone making a decision.
So you don't have
out of
someone at the
basketball.
Department of Health without having a doctor or a nurse or heck, an orderly. I don't know, but they just wanted someone. So I got a tap directly from Campbell. It wasn't actually from the Minister for Sport. It was actually from Campbell Newman and Ben Myers, who said, we remember you from what you've done at the Bullets, and we know some people that speak highly of you. Would you come and be the senior advisor to the Minister for Sport? Because, and this was the actual quote, because he doesn't know anything about sport. And now my dad had been a ministerial advisor in Victoria in Law and Order, and I'd grown up around it, and I've always been interested in politics. So I said, I'd love to. I'd love to go in there. So I went in there as a guy that had run basketball clubs and done venue deals, and I knew all the venues that the state owned, and I went in there and I did that. And so there's obviously 3-year terms, And 2 years into that, I actually resigned because the Brisbane Broncos came knocking because of my government supposed expertise, and they wanted to get their new training centre up at Red Hill.
So you have some colleagues that so now you've become like a lobbyist for the Broncos?
Well, they brought me in as the GM of corporate strategy, but that was just code for get the venue up, get the permission through to get the venue up, right? And we know that you know the government. I left 2 years into that 3-year term, and people thought a year later it was a brilliant move because Campbell got tipped out, which you've talked about. But I didn't know that. I thought he'd be there for 10 years. I just liked Paul White at the Broncos, who was the CEO,
Campbell
and I
Newman,
liked that idea.
Yeah. There's a guy that had the state at his feet.
Yeah.
And he just screwed it up.
Well, his cuts were hard, for people to get their head across in the public service. He cut heavily and so forth. I still think he was really, really good at what he did. But, politics is a fickle game. And
yes, it is.
I've worked in politics and sport, and people ask me, what's the parallels and what's the differences? And I said, well, one's, this kind of backdoor Machiavellian, knives in the back down the hallway, and the other one's working in politics. There's a lot of parallels between high-level sport and politics in terms of the lobbying and that sort of thing.
So I had a stab at the administration, not at your level, mate. I looked after our 6 senior teams with the Capitals. It's not for me. Not everybody's cut for that. I mean, I'd rather coach.
Yep.
And I'm going to coach year 10s at grammar. Right. That's how much I want to coach.
Yeah.
But the Broncos thing, was that 2 years?
Yeah, so that was about, I think I was there for close to 3. And
I remember coming over and having a coffee with you.
Yeah, so Dennis Watt was wonderful. He was the chairman. He's now the chairman at the Titans, and Paul White at the time was the CEO.
Right.
And so we got the training venue permissions up. It was big because you got to work with 3 levels of government. You got to work with the local, the state, and the feds.
Yep.
Stephen Miles, ironically enough, was the local member. He wasn't even an apple in the Premier's later future eye at that point. Got to know him. You working with all sides of politics.
Yeah.
It was great for my own personal networking, and just people I got to know.
Broncos own this town, especially at that time.
Yep.
Christ.
And then
not even close.
And then
Jeff, can you tell that Steve's a rugby league?
Well, so is most of the town, and it wasn't.
Sorry.
We can go down there. We'll go down to Wake Hole and check out what they're doing in the off season.
Oh, right, okay. Well, as opposed to St Kilda AFL players that like to spend time at places that have colourful rainbows.
Now this is how we get banned from YouTube, man.
Yeah, we got banned from YouTube. We got banned from YouTube.
For saying we were a spam.
And we were running a scam. And I'm not joking.
Is that right?
We could chop the occasional...
Someone consider that a badge of honour.
Well, we've looked at it.
You'll have to.
Yeah. Well, we actually said some stern words into a podcast that we forgot to turn play on. So they've actually gone nowhere. We'll come back to that. You and I will come back to YouTube on another...
Let me throw out the anchor and pivot. Yeah. Okay, we're going to lay down and pivot.
Did you have you worked at the Broncos, FYI? Can I just ask
I enjoyed that experience.
Who are the players?
Well, Wayne Bennett was the coach, and it was the year that they got to the grand final, and painfully the Thurston moment took over.
Or just one where Hunt dropped the ball.
Yeah, but I mean,
right.
it ended up being...
now.
He's back.
So I went down to that final and was sitting directly behind Thurston when he put on the show with the boot, and I like it. I'm an AFL follower from the time in Victoria, but I do like it. I still watch the Broncos and I still follow that. But it's good to have outside interests outside of the industry that you're in. And it's the only time I've really worked outside of basketball for any substantial period.
So what was after the...
Well, I wanted to ask, because then you went to Sydney. Am I right?
I did. Mm-hmm.
How long?
For almost 4 years I worked for Harvey Lister. So he had come to me while I was at the Broncos. And
because you had known him through this journey earlier.
He had effectively been the landlord of the club that I was running when I ran the Brisbane Bullets, because you're playing out of his venues. But I had always had a very good relationship with him, and I still do. I have a very good relationship with Harvey. And Harvey said that Harvey brought me to a coffee up at Paddington. I'll never forget it. It was a great day, and said, "Look, I'm considering, much to the chagrin of my business partner Rod Pilbeam, who've been together forever, who's a great guy.
Rod's, didn't he control the Ticketmaster or the ticketing, whatever that
you're
was?
thinking of Jeff Jones, who's on that.
I
So
remember
Rod's
Rod.
always been...
He was part of the Queensland Leisure. So
Yeah.
when I came up, Harvey, Doug Ryan, the late Doug Ryan, Rod.
That's right. But Rod Pilbeam and Harvey have been business partners in AEG and AEG Ogden, and then later ASM forever.
Forever.
Yeah. So he had always said to Harvey, the one thing we won't do is own an NBL team, because they had done it way back when they, in that previous era, the Steve Williams era.
I was coach.
Yeah. They'd done that, and they'd found it, like a lot of owners do, it's hard work.
Great way to lose money.
Yeah, want to
Get
be
a comfortable chair and a full-length mirror. Sit down and watch
how do you
yourself
be
go
a millionaire?
broke.
Start as a billionaire and then own an NBL team. But they'd found that to be a tough thing.
Yeah.
But Harvey's a strategically brilliant mind.
Yes.
And what he had seen is this is what happened for Sydney with him. Okay, because if it wasn't for his interest in buying the Kings, I wouldn't have.
He was involved with Sydney Kings.
Okay, so he owned the Kings when I went in, and this is how it occurred. He has the management rights, as we know, for a great many of the venues. Everything from the Cairns Convention Centre to RAC Arena in Perth to Suncorp Stadium to Kudos Bank Arena and many, many others. South Bank Convention Centre.
Arena, do they?
No,
he doesn't have the
no.
Olympic
Melbourne's
Park?
not where they are.
Okay.
But South Bank, where we won the championship at the Bullets, we moved it to Boondall for the final. But at the one that they referred to as the library, because it was so quiet and luxurious.
We made a point to cheer.
Okay, and then Boondall now. All of those are under his management.
Don't they? Ogden? Is it still Ogden IFC?
So no,
or they
it's
changed?
not now. It's changed.
They have stadiums around the world, though.
Yes,
don't
they do. They're part of a global. So AEG Ogden was just the Australian Pacific branch of AEG.
Okay.
Anschutz Entertainment Group. Anschutz Entertainment Group owns LA Galaxy. They were a part owner of the Lakers, 33% for a long time.
Wow.
He had seen what was happening with the Sydney Kings at the Olympic precinct, but not Kudos Bank Arena, where they were playing out of the State Basketball Centre.
Yeah.
In that Homebush precinct, while his arena that he didn't have the little one. He had Kudos Bank Arena, and still does. So his play, Bruce, was, I want to hypothetically, and he asked me, what do you think? Buy the Kings, move them out of the tin shed into Kudos Bank Arena,
in the centre of the city.
but we have 22,000 seats to fill. What's your plan if you do it? So this is an important point, because it puts context to what happened then for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
What happened for the next 4 years is I wanted to put a headline-grabbing, bum-seat-filling team on the floor. I brought Andrew Gaze in to coach.
Yeah.
I brought Brad Newley back from Europe. I poached Kevin Lish straight down from the Gong. I brought in Jerome Randall. I brought in Daniel Kickert. I brought in the best imports we could possibly get with the money that was allocated, which was not insubstantial in terms of allocation. And that was just in year one.
Who were those imports?
Travis Leslie was one of the first. David Ware. We had Randall.
Yeah.
Jerome Randall.
Would they have three then?
We were at 3.
Yeah.
But by the third year, the big one was Bogut.
Yeah.
So I did the deal to get Bogut in, the only way I could get Bogut in was to do an all-encompassing deal that allowed him to step into part ownership of the Kings, to which he still is an owner now.
Yes.
That was a deal that was constructed in order to get him here, because as we were offering him the chance to come to the Kings, China was offering him 3 times the money in US, in tax-free dollars. There was no way to compete except doing something that was greater than just a contract, and so that's what we sold.
He seems to be,
Bugs.
as each year rolls on, he seems to be evolving as a person involved with the community, the basketball community, and authority in sports.
Absolutely.
He'll end up on a AFL show talking. Like Andrew goes on to AFL shows, which is actually promoting our game.
It is.
Absolutely. Paddy Mills in the middle of the NRL rugby league, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
grand final, you know.
Transcend the sport.
Like
He transcends the sport.
Well, you can't even fathom that they're in the middle of a rugby league grand final interviewing Paddy Mills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that just blew me.
I love his podcast. I listen. It's in.
Bogart?
Yeah, it's very enlightening. He's good. He's
Can
good for our league.
I may have shared it before, but can I tell you my Bogart story?
Sure.
Okay, we're at the library. And I'm sitting with Lukey Gribble, you know, Roger Smith, Lynn Briffies, blah blah blah. And there's a couple of fans, and he was playing. It was his last season, and he got 4 fouls really early in the game, and he was sitting there on the bench. The crowd were absolutely giving it to him. And those, you know, I'm in a wheelchair, but I could use my crutches to get to my seat. And he's turned around and glared at me as if it was like me. And he's like, you know, fuck you, brother. And I'm like, fuck you. And
No, I don't think Andrew Bogut uses profanity.
oh, yeah, he did.
Okay.
And so I've got Luke Gribble sitting beside me. He said, Lukey, grab my crutches. I'm going to go down and get him. So anyway,
That's a very interesting story.
Fear was struck into the heart.
So did Harvey sell the Kings to Paul Williams?
Smith. To Paul Smith,
I'm
yep,
sorry.
yep.
Paul
So-
Williams is the
So
same.
it was
He's
really
still the
interesting.
owner, right?
Yeah, no, he's now since sold to Robin Denholm, who's the Tesla chairwoman. Okay. So Paul's a minor owner now.
Ah, I thought he was.
But so Harvey did in fact sell to Paul, but only after a year where they co-owned the team 50-50, but Harvey remained the shot caller and
Right.
chairman. And so it was at the end of that year, which coincided with myself and Andrew Gaze, that is, being out of contract, that Harvey, who is an incredibly, he's an incredibly honest operator. His integrity is pristine. So what he had said to me was that I've got you for 4 years at the Kings, okay? And this was 3 years in.
Right.
And now Paul Smith wants to buy because they had done a co-owning thing for a year, and then they needed to decide who's because it's not going to be a co-owner forever, who's going which way. And Paul Smith really wanted the club, and the offer was substantial. And Harvey came and said, "What are you and Andrew going to do if Paul Smith comes in?" And I said, "Well, I don't necessarily think that's only our decision. I think Paul's got his own, ideas, and that's fine. Like when you're an owner, you do that. So I don't know what Paul's thinking, but for us, we came to work for you, and we wouldn't want you not to sell the club." And Harvey said, "Well, I'd like to sell the club, but I don't. But if you want to stay around, I'll make it a condition that you stay." I said, "Well, that's humbling, but to do that, to be foisted upon somebody, you just end up in a side office and not necessarily."
And what may I say, foisted. What a great word.
It's the word of the day. And so we were out of contract anyway. Andrew
Right.
and I both really loved Harvey. And I mean, the transition was fine. Harvey and Paul, they did a deal and everything else. But Harvey then employed me for the other year here, back in Brisbane, to keep working for his operation.
Right.
So that just gives you an idea of
his integrity.
his integrity is just incredible. Andrew, of course, has a million things that he could have done. So he just went back to Melbourne and did his thing, and he's on everything.
I think he's made
that
a
moves.
wise decision. I mean, I'm not saying he was a bad coach, but he's a much better in front of the camera.
He's just very big in the sport. I mean, he just sort of transcends every.
No one's bigger, man.
There's no one bigger.
No,
So
but you know what I mean. You've been a coach in that. That's a very stressful job.
I think a lot of people underestimate, just on Andrew, and Bruce knows him well. I think people underestimate how smart Andrew is in basketball. He's actually capable of being, in my opinion, whatever level of coach you think. A lot of people labeled that they felt like he couldn't coach. That third year, just want to recap that year. So this was when we had Bogan and Randall, and we had Newley, and we had a really good team. We ended up equal first, but third on points for and points against.
That's
so
right.
finished out of the automatic home,
the top two.
which meant we had to play Melbourne in the 3-game series, and that was easily our worst matchup because Casper Ware was doing a number on us over Randall. Randall was good against everyone else, but Casper really felt comfortable against Randall.
Right.
And Bogues would play in the drop spot, and Casper would do the little floaters at the free throw line and shake Randall off at around the 3-point line off one screen, and that was our weak spot. And Randall couldn't stay with Casper, and Randall went down in that series with a hamstring and continued to play, much to his credit, didn't sit down but went down.
Yeah.
And we lost that. Now,
that's why I guess
we were 19 and
yeah, but
7 that year.
I didn't say
It's a good year.
Andrew couldn't.
No, I
cope.
didn't say you did.
You could see that he could, but you can see also at times when you only see Andrew, he's the happiest person. He's always smiling. He's happy, and you could see him stressed at times.
But that's
and I've
coaching.
never seen
Yeah.
Andrew Gage stressed.
Yeah, that's coaching.
You know?
That's. I think my point was not that you thought he couldn't coach. The things that I would get at times were just uneducated comments about, he's not. He's just a commentator. No, he's not. He knows basketball.
No,
backwards.
he's
very, very
I
sharp.
give Derek Rooker some props, but I think Andrew, as far as analysis goes, he's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Derek is good, by the way.
Derek's
he's really good at what
Derek's
he does.
very good. And we give him a bunch of shit.
We give him a bunch of shit about a lot of things, but we also have always said we think he's one of the
he's
best.
easily,
articulate. He knows the
Very
game.
good.
I think, bugger that. Now, how long of a gap was it between Sydney and Adelaide?
About a year and a half, I think, or maybe 2 years.
How did that come about?
That was just a discussion with Grant Kelly at the time, who was looking to try to
Still the owner, Grant Kelly?
revamp the club, and it was a discussion that came out of, I think, ironically enough, Joey initially. Joey
Because
Wright,
Joey
who
was
still
coaching
he,
there.
well, he was still there when I got there, but not long after, and it was nothing to do with me coming in. He had finished his time. I came into a really
Joey's
rough
bitter,
time.
and I read where he said he'll never go back and coach in the NBL.
Yeah, I mean that's
how he's
that goes
scarred.
back. I think that goes back to, I don't know. You'd have to ask Joey. I think it goes back to even the Adelaide Melbourne series that Adelaide really should have won, and he was the one that Childress went down when he was playing for Adelaide.
Yes,
and I think had Childress finished, but Joey made it really clear after that series that he felt like they should have won. The NBL
it wasn't an Adelaide issue; it was a league issue.
No, well, when I got there, there'd been a big ruction between Joey and Kevin White.
Okay.
If you remember all of that, and
Yes.
there was a big thing, and
Yes.
I walked into that.
Because White
It was a
but
tough
there
time to come in.
about favoritism or
I
something.
can't remember, but it was a really tough time, and Joey worked out a deal with Grant and left with a couple years remaining on his contract, and
So who did you get in then as coach? Was that
so I brought in Connor.
Connor? Right.
Yep, I brought in Connor Henry.
Henry.
Yep.
And he lasted.
Well, he lasted a year. That was an unrelated to basketball situation that meant that he didn't last beyond a year. But I felt like he was a really good coach. But it was a tough environment.
In Adelaide, it's hard to. Even this team this year, which is talented, right? They punt Scotty Ninnis minutes away for an assistant coach was coming over. He's now the head coach, who hasn't actually. He's been a career assistant coach, and I'm not saying he's a bad coach either. But
I don't know him at all.
Matty Weston, I know Matt. Matt was a coach. He was
an assistant at West Sydney Razorbacks.
Correct for
And then
Gordon.
he worked in China for a long time.
Correct.
Yep.
And he made his money in China with diapers, adult
Believe so.
diapers.
Yep.
We'll get. He's going to send me a shitload, but I thought that was odd. That was a strange thing. Jeff, did you have anything to do with Larry about creating the Next Stars?
No, the answer to there is that the Next Stars was happening. The Next Stars concept was happening previous to the NBL doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what had actually happened, if you want to talk about Joey Wright had pulled off a Next Stars-like deal. Yep,
with Josh.
That was my time.
That's
Josh
with
was
Kai Soto?
no, the kid that went on to make the NBA and play for Oklahoma City, whose name's escaping me. Terence Ferguson.
Right.
So Terence Ferguson, Joey had constructed a deal that looks similar to what the Next Stars deals involve, which is that an umbrella contract went over Terence Ferguson for more than just that year. that was a multi-year deal. Joey felt, and he was right, that Terence Ferguson would be good enough to get drafted mid-contract, and he knew the rules, which was that if the NBA drafts a player mid-contract, they must have a buyout, and it's for a set amount of money. It's not the old days where the Greek owners would say, "No, I'll just wait for 5 years because I want 100 million." No, not like that now. It's a set amount of money. It's actually by rule and by law approved by FIBA and the whole works. That if the NBA drafts a player, you cannot stop them, but you must be paid as a club. You must be paid. You cannot stop them, okay? Unless they owe you money or there's a criminal issue or something. But other than that, you can't stop them.
Right.
So if you want to really get real about that whole thing, it was Joey, and it was also Daniel Moldovan doing similar deals.
Right.
The agent, who I do a lot of work with now.
Yep.
Those guys, and not together. Daniel didn't do Joey's thing.
Yeah.
It was Joey, and it was Daniel constructing those type of things. What the NBL did was they formalized it, they labeled it, they marketed it, and that's what they've done with Next Stars. So Next Stars is a formulaic thing to do with putting a contract over someone that they think's good enough to be drafted mid-contract, and then divvying up a buyout between the NBL and the club concerned.
Right. Okay.
That's how it's constructed. Now you mentioned Josh. My deal with Josh that I put together when
Josh Giddey.
When I brought Josh Giddey into Adelaide, I initially signed him with Daniel Moldovan as his agent on a non-Next Stars deal. And I sent to Josh just as a normal playing deal, and I sent that heads of agreement to Jeremy Lowleager, who was the CEO of the NBL at the time, or then became the commissioner, whatever the label was. And he said, well, we want him as a Next Star. And I said, well, that's fine. You can want what you want, but he's good enough to be in our 10 as not a Next Stars player. That was a strategic move on our end, my end and Daniel's end, to say we don't want the player just dictated to by the NBL in terms of, because you got to understand, when a Next Stars player is contracted, and now Liam Santamaria runs that program. Okay. That when a Next Stars player is contracted, they're obliged to do certain things for the NBL, which is fine, marketing things and do all the right thing, no problem at all. But also the NBL is used to putting in a contract structure, which, as I said earlier, benefits a number of parties in any ensuing buyout.
Well, and what I hear is that NBL pays the Next Stars salary.
Yes, but
the NBL then gets paid back.
That's true, but sometimes that's a deceptively good deal for the NBL. Because if the NBL is paying a guy, so let me just take it away from Josh, take it over to LaMelo Ball.
Okay.
LaMelo Ball went to the Illawarra Hawks, ended up playing, I think, a dozen games.
Yeah.
Not many more than that. The NBL said to Illawarra, well, no problem. We've got a great kid for you. He's got all the hype in the world. He's got zillions of followers on social media, and we'll pay for him. Okay, we'll pay for him. And they, sign us up. They got LaMelo Ball in. The NBL had him in there. The NBL made the vast majority of the buyout. Illawarra felt like they were getting a gift at the start because they got the player paid for by the NBL. But what happened with the buyout? And what happened with the team? He only played a dozen games. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that's probably great business by the NBL.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily great business for the team. So
still today, you think that?
I think that it can be and it can't be. I think you got to look at each individual case. If you've got a kid that's getting all the way through the year, like say Ariel Hakporti did at Melbourne, I think that was a really good scenario for Melbourne, because they had his services, the kid tried hard.
Then he's gone and they can just replace him.
No problem at all. But he didn't skip out halfway through the year like LaMelo Ball did.
But have any of them been skipping out? I just don't recall that.
Yeah, they have. And it's happened a few times. RJ Hampton didn't finish the season. LaMelo Ball didn't finish it. So my point is, I didn't want any of that complication with a kid that I felt like was good enough to just start in the NBL at 17 anyway, which was Josh Giddey. I was high on Josh. I felt like he'd be just fine. Turned out to be he was just fine. So what happened is that Low Leaguer and co wanted him as a next star. So we then said, okay, well, if he's the next star, the deal will look like this. He's a next star, no problem, but this is how the financial deal will be. Now, the buyout then was in favour of the Adelaide 36ers.
Right.
That's
Okay.
nice.
Yeah, which is another reason that I think
quietly, Adelaide have to have a bit of extra cash. I like to pay out all their coaches.
True. But
So-
so a guy like Rocco Zakarski.
Yep.
Did I pronounce that correct?
Sikorsky.
You'd want to sign him another year, just so, because I don't know.
Well, it
whether
depends on what the kid wants. Like, if he's nominated for the draft and he gets drafted, that's a judgment call by the agent and the player.
And I believe he has.
And I think he has, and I think he'll probably get drafted. I don't know what the latest is. Does he go second round? I'm not sure.
I mean, he seems like an amazing
The
kid.
one guy I think they missed out on is Taron Armstrong.
Yeah, well, Taron Armstrong, is a different case because he's come into it a bit later.
Yeah.
And look, to be honest, it's an imperfect science deciding who's good enough to be a next star, because coming out of that Division II school, it in LA where he was, I think it was Cal Baptist,
Yes,
second
Cal Baptist.
division.
Yeah.
He didn't set the world on fire there.
Which
He's looked
kids is?
better in the NBL. Taron Armstrong has looked better in the NBL than he did in college, so it's not always a perfect science. But with Josh, I think one of the things that sticks with me about the Adelaide situation is I think we delivered Adelaide a gift in terms of the buyout and the hype and all of the things that ensued.
No question.
And so, I think
To get him to win that out over a Melbourne club.
Well, Warwick was working at Melbourne at the time. And so the way we won that battle was that I was prepared to not recruit any other guard and any other import guard into that spot. So my pitch to Daniel Moldovan and Josh Giddey in a meeting
You're running the show.
was, this is your team. And I know we're going to get a lot of people say he's a 17-year-old point guard. Connor Henry said that. Connor, 17-year-old point guard starting, like there was a lot of nervousness by him around that. But in the end, that was the pitch we made, whereas Dean would have done what he probably could afford to do, which was just bring Josh along. Josh along. So whereas we had him, and in the third game he went for a triple-double. And
He's special.
Yeah, he is special.
At every level. What about Dyson Daniels' brother?
So he's better than Dyson was at this age.
Wow.
And so
how good is Dyson
now,
right now?
now Dash Daniels, you'll need to temper what might happen. I mean, he might surprise everybody, but I don't think they need to rush him in year one. You know why? He's not draft eligible at the end of this season anyway.
He's like Lopez.
17?
Yeah, he's 16, I think.
Fuck.
So in the end, it's his second year that you need to watch.
Yeah.
So whether what Melbourne's going to do and Dean knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. What they're going to do is going to be really interesting to me. Do they start to nudge Delhi out into a lesser role, or do they even let him go because he'll obviously have some currency in the open market, knowing that Dash comes, or do they keep him for another year and know that it's the next year that's Dash's year? I don't know. It's a rhetorical question.
Know. But Dean will know.
But he's really, really, really good. And I spent about, a few days recently with Ricky Daniels.
Yeah.
And who's a lovely guy and knows basketball.
I remember him as a player.
He's great.
Yeah.
And I coached in the state league in Victoria against Ricky when he was playing for Bendigo. And Ricky, is very even-handed and very good for those boys. And Dyson's a wonderful person as well, and he's doing great this year. And Dash, I think, will do the equal.
Yeah, that's a
The
talented
Dyson Daniels story, because what is he, still 21?
You know who else is a baller? Is CJ's son.
Yeah, Rio.
So is he on anybody's radar?
I haven't seen much of him in the last 6 months, and obviously CJ's overseas, so I haven't seen him for a while. But I hear he's really good.
I hear he's really good. Yeah. So let's get back into the JVG story. How long were you at Adelaide?
I did 2 seasons and I resigned.
Okay.
I resigned mid-season 2.5 years ago here in Brisbane. I never went back.
Right.
Well, I did go back to pack the house, but that was to me a really tough situation. It was. I think I was spoiled by working for the 3 previous clubs.
They're strange over there,
Well,
mate. They
there's
eat their own.
Three scenarios before that had been very different, and Adelaide. It's. I think there's a lot of influences around that club.
Yeah.
That are not optimal for anybody.
A quick story. So I had my choice of here or Adelaide, and I made 2 visits to Adelaide, and they took me around to South Adelaide, West Adelaide, Forestville, and everybody's telling me what we should do. And one thing that they about the technical problem with my producers out of state.
Well,
So
and the assistant producer that's with us tonight is a little bit preoccupied by his iPad. Yeah,
we recruit a new person.
and he's a little young.
We recruit him in for each show.
Yeah.
We're going to tie a bow on Adelaide with Jeff, and then I want to hear about because it's been every year you say that you've been to the Summer League.
Except for the COVID year.
Oh, yeah.
When we couldn't attend. But 2002 they moved.
They didn't do it? Did they
No,
do
they
it
did
the
do
COVID
it.
year?
They did do it in a
okay.
bubble. And 2002 they moved what had been, you'd remember, the LA Summer Pro League
Sure.
out of Long Beach,
Yeah.
out of that pyramid
Yes.
gym there.
Yeah.
And they came across to Vegas, and ever since then it's become bigger and bigger, and now it's the preeminent one. You may remember it used to be one at Boston, one at Orlando, one at Seattle, one at Rocky Mountain Review at Utah. There was
Yeah.
all these little disparate ones. And now some of those are going for 2 and 3 days. Most of them aren't going at all, and all of it descends into Vegas, all the 30 NBA teams. And I've always taken a VIP group there. I've always attended. I got to know some luminary people there that were just kind with their time. Some of the bigger names that you get a chance to try to siphon some type of IQ from. Mm-hmm. And it was great. I haven't missed one except for the COVID year.
And you're going to do it again this year? You're going to take another tour group?
Yeah, I'll take another group and just
So
take
how many in the group go?
Take somewhere between 10 and 15, and I just take them around. We take them to a function that that's run every year that's just Australians in the NBA, whether they're coaches, players, admins, agents. Daniel pulls that together.
That's very cool.
It's phenomenal. But also just I take them and every night. So, for example, Bruce, we had Gorge come in and speak to the group because he's there with New York. He always is a guest coach with New York.
He's really close with Leon Rose.
He's close there, and then he'll come in and address the group in the hotel suite after the night's play is finished. And it's just it's bring your drink, bring your food. Tonight it's Brian Gorgon, and then it's the next night. Bring your drink, bring your food. Tonight's Phil Handy.
And where do you go stay in the same location?
Well, one of a couple that I've gotten to know, and you get to know where the teams stay, and you catch up with teams, and you bring a player in.
Can you go in and watch team practice?
Yeah, I've taken the group into team
They
practice.
always have a coach's. I know Brian's done a coach's clinic there.
Yeah, that's right. And then I'll get, like, say last year, Luke Travers was out there, and I had Travers meet the group. And there's always Aussies there. There's always Aussies trying out. Yeah. It's just bringing some people in. But assistant coaches that I know, Brett Brown's spoken to the group before.
Wow.
Just being like, so it's if you're a basketball industry person or like the industry, you don't have to be in the industry, but if you like the industry, that's the one. Because
do they have a trade at the same time? Like, do they have there's so many businesses that make money, like making rings, there's
tons of those types of trade shows. There's AAU games that are going on down the road. It's become a big industry sort of situation. But to me, as someone in my situation that likes to maintain a decent level of networking, do you go to the States in February and have to go to 30 cities to see 30 people, or do you go in one city and you got all of them coming in?
And it just happens to be Vegas, baby.
Does
easy answer.
Warren's offsider
Albert Hall?
Albert.
Yep.
Does he help you with accommodation?
In the past he has, but now it's really
you just do it.
Yeah, just do it.
You've got that network.
Al Hall was really nice to us in the early days, but I understand what I need to do as far as accommodation and things like that. So.
And I see on social media you still have you're still doing stuff with Josh Giddy.
Yeah, so I run Josh's off-court camps and things for
Right.
Daniel Moldovan, but not just Josh's. So
Right.
did Dyson's signature camp last year in Bendigo. I'll be doing Tui's things at Easter before he goes over to his pre-draft stuff with Jordan
Right.
Lawley. I'll do Luke Travers's. I did Travers's last year. They're all clients of Daniel that I just subcontract him out to. Daniel just is happy for me to do those
I want
events.
to pay you a huge compliment. I thought the Gorgon Clinic,
Gorge is another one.
I mean, we could have had, that could have gone 3 hours.
Yeah.
You know, that was
Well, I'll be doing his again in Adelaide, so I'll take him back to Adelaide where I went
Boy
last
Gorge?
year. Yep, take him into Norwood.
Okay.
Last year we did a Good
Are
Friday.
you guys going to bring him back up here?
We'll bring him wherever and he's prepared to go pretty much anywhere. So
That'd be great.
The Adelaide one will be a Thursday night clinic at Norwood, a Friday coach the coaches. Then we'll take him to Victor Harbour.
Right.
And he's unreal because he gets in the car and says, "Where are we going?" And then you know him; he's a wind up and go guy.
Correct.
And so all of that. So I'm doing all of those. I'm doing things now that are probably often it may not be known that I'm doing them. I'm just pulling them together behind the scenes.
And you enjoying
I'm
that?
just I'm
What
enjoying it.
what I admire, and I think you're a great example for those. You know, we can't play anymore, but there's playing, there's refereeing, there's score bench, there's statisticians now, the
Running
analytics.
venues, like
Yeah.
just the
Running
logistics of a
venues,
venue
but-
with 10
but
basketball courts, you know?
You're entrepreneurial.
Entrepreneur.
You know what I'm trying to say, mate. You found a way to craft a career in basketball outside of the coaching, obviously the management. I mean, I would think that any club would give their eye teeth to get Jeff Van Groningen in to run our club.
Well,
Would you feel limited by that?
What I found the last couple of years since Adelaide is that it is nice to be able to not say no to really anything other than what the calendar allows you to do. If there's a clash, you can't do that when
Yeah.
you're running a club. You can't work for, you can't
Someone
work
else.
7 or 8 different places. And
Yeah.
what I do enjoy that. I do enjoy, there's a couple of private tournaments that are engaging me to actually come and help them with their tournament
Right.
and say, how do we make this tournament go from a great tournament with 80 or 90 teams to one that's got 80 or 90 teams, but then Brian Gordon's addressing the coaches one day and you're bringing a player for a meet and greet one day and it's going to set our tournament apart.
It makes it
Jeff,
different.
did you ever meet Matt Beyer and
No, I spoke quite some time to Amanda,
yeah,
Brian's wife, about Matt, and there was some
Henry Kieran's?
there was some
Yeah.
thought that I'd get a chance. I never had a chance to do that, but I
They-
did go to the Philippines.
See, I didn't go to the Philippines.
I did go to
Macau
I did
first
go to
2
the
years.
Philippines to go and spend time with Tad Baldwin
Right.
when I was at Sydney, and it was a very funny story there. Just quickly, Mark Dickel was there coaching
Yeah.
at Ateneo University, and he had asked me. I was very, very humbled. He had said, "Look, the club actually wants a bit of a kind of a call it an audit. They would love an outsider from the NBL to come in, and I'd like you to come and watch practice and see how we do things, and then watch the game and see how we do things." So I go into to the training venue in Manila, where Mark Dickel's leading this team, and it's in the PBL. It's like, this is not under 20s. This is like the full thing. And Dickel's out there, and he's obviously been heavily influenced by Brian, and so he looks like a mini Gorge, and he's stopping. It's all great, and then it's film, and then I went in, and it's the inner sanctum, and it's film, and there's Dickel's running everything, and there's a cast of thousands of Filipino assistant coaches. I didn't know where to look. It looked like the tons. Okay.
More than
And then, more than players, right? And I'm just thinking, this is a well-resourced, it's great. Dickel's got all the help he needs, but Dickel's doing all of it. And then the players file out, and Mark says, let's have a powwow, let's have a debrief. What notes did you take? And I said, well, I just can't fault it. It looks like an NBL practice. It's great. Film was great. You were clear, and the players responded. I said, one question, this cast of thousands that look like extras on a movie set, what's their role?
What's their
He said,
purpose?
oh, well, they're assistant coaches. And by the way, I can't be the head coach. I'm not the head coach here.
Right.
It's by rule. It's got to be a Filipino.
So he was at a university now because he coached a team.
Yeah, but at this stage he was in the PBL,
Right.
But not the head coach. He was like the technical. You know how it is.
Right.
You've been in that Asian sphere.
One of the head coaches was sitting.
Well, no. That was my question, Steve. So I actually said, so which one of the, 23.5 guys that are around here is the head coach? He go, oh, he wasn't here. He rolls in.
He was in China.
He rolls in,
smoking cigarettes.
He rolls in on game. He's the president of the club, and I'm like, this is bizarre. So I went and watched the game. So they're playing the Nilex Warriors.
Dickel run the game?
And Dickel. No, but there's Dickel on the bench, and there's the president of the club looking the part, a statesman-like Lindsay Gage Filipino version figure, who's standing, doing this one occasionally, just the arm out, and then Dickel coming up and tapping him on the shoulder. Need a timeout, coach? Oh, timeout. And then Dickel runs the timeout, and then away they go.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. So I did that. I also, by the way, Bruce, at the time, and I don't know if it's still the rule, but that's why Tab was coaching not at the highest level, because he couldn't. He wants to be the university level. He wants to be the head coach, and what he put to me is he's had lots of offers to go into that, but he can't be the head coach at that next level. Now they may have changed that rule, but at least a few years back.
The guy Cone that beat Gorgon when they had 60,000.
Yeah, but that wasn't in the PBL. That was in the East Asian Super League. So their rule is not the same.
No, it was the
PBL
Commissioners Cup.
Okay, Commissioners Cup. Okay,
right.
Well, maybe.
So they can bring it.
So the other thing that strikes me about Manila, and I got to Manila in the same off season as I got to Greece, because Harvey, get back to him, phenomenal visionary guy. So he said to me at the end of each season, what are you going to improve over the off season? And I've never been asked that.
Harvey asked
me that. What are you, as an executive, what are you going to improve?
Right.
And I said, well, I'd like to, if you really want to know, I've had a long standing interest in seeing two of the most passionate fan bases, to see how they engage, how their players cope with that, how their coaches cope with that, because I want Sydney to be that. I want them to be tribal in their, well, why don't you go to, how Harvey speaks, why don't you go to Manila, and why don't you go to Athens?
Yeah.
And there he sent me, and it wasn't on the back of the bus either. There it goes, and going in, and so I went to those two places in one off season. Now here's the two quick anecdotes. I get into the Philippines, Manila airport. I get in the back of one of those obscenely long jeepneys. They got the jeepneys.
Yeah.
Like they go, like you can't see the end of them. And I'm sitting in the back seat of the jeepney, and I have a polo shirt on with a logo no bigger than yours right there, Steve. Standard size logo on the polo shirt. Did not even say Sydney Kings. It was just the Sydney Kings logo. And I'm, for some reason, even though it's a crowded place, I'm the only person in the jeepney. And I see the driver of the jeepney keep looking in the rear vision mirror and staring at me. And I'm
this
getting
in the Philippines, Manila.
In Manila, at the airport. First impression.
Fanatical basketball country.
I think I'm getting self-conscious on what, have I got I'm not supposed to have my seatbelt on here. Is everything okay? I said to him, he goes, oh, sorry, Sydney Kings. And I said, he goes, and it's not even written. And I said, yeah, Sydney Kings, I work for the Kings. Do you want me to tell you 25 imports that have played for the Sydney Kings? 25, random number. I said, sure. I've never seen anything like it. He's gone back to Mark Ridlin. He's gone, Mark Ridlin, A.C. Earl, Kenny McClary, Dwayne McClary. He's just gone. Steve Carfino, straight through.
That's
crazy.
I said,
that's unreal. So that was the first thing. Then the Greek thing, I get into Athens. I'm so used to, you become spoiled when you're in the NBL and you're running clubs. You don't think of ticketing. You show up, someone's, hosts you. You're lucky. You're privileged. You don't think of ticketing. So I'm in Athens, and I've gone to see Newley because we had given Newley permission to play in the Greek league after the NBL season finished. So I had Newell's on the list to see, and Jason Kadee, because they were both with the club at the time at the Kings. Okay. So I went and saw them play. And then I've got my eye on a guy that's down in Crete playing for the Rethimo Kings. He's a guy out of South Florida. I can't remember his name now. 6'8" guy, was a good import. And I was keen on him. And so I fly down to Rethimo. I say to Harvey, I'm going to go look at this guy since I'm here. I think he could be a good import. Oh, yeah, Jeff, just go down there. So I go down there. And I'm stupid because I've underestimated the passion of the Greek fans.
Oh, mate.
Playing against the Rethimo Kings, who are a bottom-dwelling team at the time, is Panathinaikos.
Right.
And they've traveled down there with their full crew of flare-burning, PA, noise-making, skull and crossbones Panathinaikos banner-bearing psycho fans down the middle of the street.
And you're trying to find them in Sydney.
Yeah, and I that's right. And I didn't need to know where the gym was. I just followed them.
Right.
I still haven't got a ticket. I thought the gym would be this big thing because I'd just come out of Olympiacos versus Ike Athens, where Newly played in a stadium that was a cavern. Okay, it was like Kyrgios Bank Arena. It was huge. I'm like, it's no problem. I'll get there. I'll get a ticket. I'll sit at the back if I need to. And I get there, and it's the size of the arena in Geelong. It's tiny. It's just this little brick joint. And I go to the thing, and there's guys with the machine guns on the thing. Like, they're not mucking around. They clip your ticket and also clip their gun at the same time, right? Do you have a ticket? I'm like, no. I'll just move around to the next door. I'll find my way in. So, no, it's all bad. So I'm down there. I'm desperate to get in now because now it's exciting. These guys I'm hearing the noise. So I took some liberty with the truth. I'm sorry to my mother. I said to I said, which one speaks English? So I go to the usher that speaks English. And I said, my name's Jeff Van Groningen. I run the Sydney Kings. You guys are the Rethimo Kings. We're sort of like a sister club. It's not true. And
can I get in?
Can I get in? And she said, no. Like I was flat dismissive, no.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking on my feet. I'm down here. I'm a long way from Athens. I know the owner. I don't know the owner. Okay, but I know the owner. So she goes, no problem. I get the owner. So then she disappears to go get the owner. I do not know the owner.
That's when you went in.
Yeah, the owner. No, I didn't.
Okay.
I couldn't get in. She comes back. This guy named Nick Kaliatos or something like that, and he said, and he speaks perfect English, which I thought was a tremendous disadvantage because I was hoping there'd be a lost in translation kind of.
Right.
It's a misunderstanding. The lady tells me. This is how he spoke. The lady tells me that you know me, and I said, look, I'm coming clean. I don't know you. I've come all the way down from Athens to see it. In fact, I've actually come from Sydney to Athens to Rethimo to see your team play. I didn't have the heart to tell him I'm actually looking at one of your players to try to recruit him because he played for him.
That'd be
okay.
Great.
He goes, where did you say you're from? I said, I'm from the Sydney Kings. He goes, I went to school with Mike Wroblewski at university. He was my closest friend. He was in my wedding party.
Oh,
I said, you're kidding me. I said, I have the Wroblewski family at every game, which is true. We have him sitting there, and Mike obviously has,
Past,
but I can't believe it. He goes, come and sit with me. So I'm in there. I'm in the front row. So Harvey calls me that night. How did you go with the player? I said, he was really good, but he was not for us.
But you had a good night.
Most importantly,
really
Jeff, was it fully catered?
Yeah, well, it was. There was, a variety of different foods there.
Mate, we're going to try to tie this into a bow. So, can I just ask your opinion? Because I know that you've been following basketball. You've been involved in basketball at every possible level.
Bruce, I think he loves the game.
Oh, he loves the game. Remember me asking you about one of them players from Adelaide? Does he love the game?
Yeah.
And there was a silence.
Yeah.
I know he likes the game. It didn't,
It's not enough.
And now I
true.
think he's proven that
Yeah.
he loves the game. All right, let's go. We're going to pick your, we're going to, really quick, we're going to do this collectively. We're going to, this was off script.
Okay.
We're going to go through the playoffs.
Okay.
Like tonight, the game starts shortly, and I know he's going to want to be there.
9:30 tonight.
9:30. Perth and Southeast Melbourne.
Perth tonight, but they have to move out of their venue, which is
God, they're going to play
highly
in that
inconvenient.
Besser brick.
Yeah.
4,500.
Yeah, but it'll be loud and crazy, and I think
It'll still have an atmosphere.
well, it always does in Perth, but it's a pity they don't have their 13,500 Red Army. But I think it'll be Perth.
And shout out to fifth time now. How many MVPs did Andrew Gaze win?
7. So Bryce has got 2 more if he wants to catch him.
Well, 5's impressive.
5's incredible.
7
As
is
an
just
import,
remarkable.
I personally think this year has been the
year.
most impressive.
Yeah,
Incredible.
He has,
28
man.
a game.
The big issue is can they retain him, because the money coming out of places like Japan for him right now is
Would be huge.
very large.
Huge.
Very large.
You know, this is what I'd be telling. I don't know what Terrell is going to do, but Japan. You know, that is on our doorstep. Nick Kay's doing great.
It's the biggest threat to the NBL right now. It's actually bigger than China, because the transition, as you know, is lesser to Japan than it is to China as a person.
And the league is professional. I'm not going to say it's the second, third, or fourth best league in the world, but it's professional.
Professional, it's well run.
Now, we heard about Xavier Cooks being suspended for taking some, we don't know. They leave it all gray. You know, was he, we got to assume it was some medication.
I have no idea.
So he's out. Thursday.
It's hard.
So that's
Sydney,
Adelaide.
Kings, Adelaide. And with Cooks out, that makes
Big difference.
Adelaide huge compared to the Kings. Because Cooks maybe not 7 foot, but he plays like a 7 footer.
And they already don't have Leo Pepe.
Pepe.
Yeah, the Pepe's out.
And
I got to be honest. I've seen enough of Adams. Adams and the other Oliver.
well, he looks a shadow of what he did.
Sure does. And it looks like, you know, they surgically removed any effort defensively. That was taken away. And then Oliver.
Well, Oliver would have to have a game for the ages, I think, for them to be competitive.
He's in shape
there's
now.
one thing
it
Adelaide
didn't
are.
take him long, but I mean, he came out here. He looked like a pastry chef, and like, mate, this isn't a Gorgon team.
No.
You know, Brian's teams are always rivets defensively. They don't have the personnel. And you know, I don't know. Who's your pick?
Well, it's in Sydney, and that will help them.
Yeah.
And Adelaide has shown on occasion that if things run against them,
They implode.
that's not good.
Yeah.
So I think it's either Adelaide's going to get out ahead of it, and I don't think Sydney's got the ability to catch them if they're out ahead of it.
Yeah.
But I think if it's tight, I think Brian might have to retro a little bit on this one and go.
Sean Bruce.
But also just slow it down a bit.
Yeah.
You know, that's not the pace that he's played for a few years, but I think he might have to slow it down a little
The
bit.
last
keep it close.
time they played, which is in their last 4 games, I believe, they got down, they clawed back.
Yeah.
They had the ball tied. No, they were down 1, out of bounds play, and I didn't recognize a play. You know, which is unusual.
Yeah.
Adelaide steals it, and there they go. You lose by 1, and then they lost in a similar fashion to United. Only they were defending the out of bounds, and Goulding sets a back pick, and White gets a dunk.
Open.
It's like, Jesus,
Down the
man.
middle.
You know, those aren't.
I see that way too often at the moment, to be honest with you. Some of these
Yeah.
out-of-bound plays from the baseline, and someone gets a layup.
A layup.
Okay,
You know,
like,
so I don't know who you're picking. You're picking
Well,
Sydney?
let me tell you this.
Picking
I had
Sydney at
picked
home.
Sydney with my tipping that, with a bunch of mates. And then I find out late this afternoon that Cooks is out, so I'm rethinking what I might.
Yeah, that's
Because the big, I just think Humphreys is doing a
Adelaide
good job.
probably has the lineup to do it. But I think
and
in
Martin
Sydney.
coming off the bench, he can play, and he's just finally got himself back into shape, I think.
And no one can guard the guard for
the
Adelaide.
guard. He's big time.
Like, he's really good.
Yeah. So okay.
I just want to also, before we wrap it up with Jeff, I just want to give a shout out to Jason Kadee,
Yeah,
who's
great
announced
guy.
his retirement. I see him coaching. You know, he's
You
got
see him
that
coaching
pedigree.
already. You see him on the bench coaching. I
He's
like
really
Jason
smart.
Kadee.
We had him in
Really like
Sydney, and I thought he was really, really great for us. And yeah, he's a quality person.
He's a good human.
He is. He's really good.
Yeah,
He's been
we-
influential with some of the young guys coming through, by the way, too. a lot of the young junior Queensland kids.
Oh, yeah.
He's
He's
very
done some
close to
work with-
Rocco.
Yeah.
Very much so. He would come to Terrace and do clinics
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
our kids, and he was just great, you know.
Yeah.
And I really, he's got a very high IQ. We've done a couple of basketball sessions where we were able to talk, right, strategies, talent, and I'm like, mate, this guy is. If every player, right, invested as a student of the game like Jason did, I'd like to have those guys on my team.
God, yeah.
Will he keep playing NBL 1, as he said?
I believe he will. He's really close with Anthony Petrie.
Petrie on the Gold Coast.
His parents live on the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
I hope he does.
Yeah.
He makes this competition better. Jeff, thank you so much,
Yes, no
man.
problem.
You're
Thank
a
you,
great
guys.
story, a great basketball story, just a great professional career story.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, mate. Give me a handful of knuckle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, mate.
Jeff.
Thank you, Steve.
No worries.
Appreciate
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Jeff. And,
Thank you, Connor.
and thanks to our producer, good boy, Connor. Okay. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.